Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's dive into some of the top headlines. US President Donald Trump's massive budget bill is heading for a final House vote after Republican holdouts dropped their opposition over debt and healthcare. Trump aims to sign the plan by July the 4th, tying its passage to America's Independence Day. Liverpool forward Diogo Jota has died in a car accident in Spain after his vehicle left the road during an overtake, police say. His brother, Andre Filipe, also died in the crash. Jota, 28, was a Portuguese international and part of Liverpool's title-winning squad. A Russian attack on central Ukraine city of Poltava has killed 2 people and damaged a military recruitment center, officials say. This comes as a Russian strike on Ukraine's southern port city of Odessa left 5 injured, including a 7-year-old boy and a 9-year-old girl. The Pentagon says US strikes have pushed back Iran's nuclear program by up to 2 years after destroying 3 critical targets, with intel estimates putting the damage probably closer to 2 years. Meanwhile, the US State Department calls it unacceptable that Iran has suspended IAEA cooperation and demands Tehran return to full compliance immediately. Hamas says it's reviewing a final ceasefire plan but insists Israel must withdraw from Gaza while Netanyahu vows to eliminate the group. Trump claims Israel agreed to conditions for a 60-day truce, with most of Israel's cabinet backing the deal and Gazans hoping it ends the war. President Trump says the US will impose a 20% tariff on Vietnam imports under a last-minute trade agreement. The deal avoids a steeper 46% levy and ensures Vietnam will charge no tariffs on US products, as other countries scramble to reach deals. An Indonesian ferry carrying 65 people sank near Bali, leaving 4 dead and 30 still missing, according to the search and rescue agency. The KMP Tanu Pratana Jaya went down just 30 minutes after leaving East Java as rescuers battle through rough seas to find survivors. More than 230 firefighters and aerial crews are battling massive blazes on Crete that has destroyed forests and olive groves. Strong winds are complicating efforts as over 1,000 people are evacuated, with some suffering respiratory issues. Now, our top story today, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories, Francesca Albanese, has issued a scathing condemnation of Israel's actions in Gaza, calling the region's humanitarian foundation a death trap engineered to kill or displace its people. The rapporteur described the situation in Gaza as apocalyptic, accusing Israel of being responsible for what she called one of the cruelest genocides in modern history. The rapporteur called on international community to impose a full arms embargo on Israel, along with the suspension of all trade agreements and investment ties with the country. The comments come amid mounting global pressure over the humanitarian crisis unfolding in Gaza. I want to apologise for my language earlier there. We are talking about the Palestinian territories in Israel. We're now joined by Peter Baum, who's the foreign editor of the Weekly Blitz, located in London, to discuss this in further detail. Peter, I want to get your immediate response to this this statement that's been issued by the United Nations Rapporteur, the accusation of genocide, which is something that echoes throughout current modern discourse. How do you respond to this? And do you think these statements ignore the threats Israel faces from Hamas?
Thank you, Thomas. Glad to be with you and your viewers and listeners. The report from the UN Rapporteur comes as no surprise. It's predictable in its demonisation of Israel, because those of us who have been following the Israel-Palestinian situation for decades understand that this particular lady is a virulently anti-Jewish state commentator, and she has been given a platform to express her views. Now, in many circles, especially in the United States, they've even asked she be removed from her position because her views are so biased. And yet,
Peter, I just
the
want to
way
get your sources of this statement that you're making, that this UN official is biased against Israel, just so you can inform our viewers.
Thomas, this goes back for generations. United Nations Watch and the various members of the current Trump administration are quoting sources going back years. I think, Thomas, you will find, although she presents herself as being a lawyer, she's not a lawyer. So that tells you something about herself. She's based in Tunisia. She's been a pro-Palestinian activist for decades. And I think the Trump administration have asked the UN to actually remove her from her post. The UN body to which she's affiliated to has refused to do so and got out the report rather quicker than was expected, because the Trump administration are putting so much pressure on them to remove the lady from her post. So it's well known in diplomatic circles. She's actually just been barred from giving a talk at a university in Switzerland, in Bern, because of her rabid anti-Semitism. Now that should tell you and our viewers something about where she's coming from on this. So the report itself was predictable. It's same old, and does nothing to move the peace process further. All it does is further isolate Israel in global opinion, but hopefully in the weeks and months to come, her report will just be put in the dustbin where it belongs.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. We move on to our next story. In a related development, a deadly strike occurred in Gaza today. Rescuers say at least 25 people have been killed in Israeli strikes, including 12 who died when a shelter for displaced families was hit. The strike reportedly targeted the Mustafa Hafez school in the Al Rimal neighborhood of western Gaza City. The school was sheltering civilians, many of whom were women and children who had fled previous fighting. In total, according to reports, 25 people were killed across multiple strikes, with dozens more injured. The Israeli military says it is aware of the reports and is looking into the incident. As the conflict continues, international concern is mounting over the rising civilian death toll and the safety designated of shelters. Peter, this isn't the first incident like this that has happened during the war. We've seen multiple schools, multiple civilian infrastructure hit, like hospitals. How do Israel justify the strikes that end up hitting shelters for displaced families? Is enough being done to avoid civilian deaths? We are running those visuals right now of the children who have reportedly been picked up from this wreckage. We've also seen visuals of that displacement shelter that has been destroyed and hit, where civilians were reportedly sheltering. What are your views on this, Peter?
Well, Thomas, if in fact this has happened, then it's just an unforgivable event and should be investigated. Before coming on to do this interview, I phoned up my sources in Israel, and I had the latest online output from various Israeli newspapers, including the Jerusalem Post, I-24 News, and even Haaretz. Haaretz, as we know, is a very anti-Netanyahu mouthpiece. Now, leading up to what you've just told me, that you've been seeing images, I could find no confirmation from Israel that the Israeli military had in fact undertaken this atrocity if that's what's happened. If it is, it is clearly outrageous. But normally, when such an area is targeted, the Israeli intelligence is quite precise normally, Thomas, and they would be targeting Hamas operatives or someone in the Hamas high command. If in fact civilians have been targeted, and that can be verified, and only the hours ahead will show us that, then obviously it is an outrage and will have to be investigated, as I'm sure it would be. I think also, Thomas, when I was on the programme last, I did mention to you, I said to you, do you know, Thomas, in the days ahead, what we're going to see is a continuation of news outflow whereby we will be seeing the Hamas Ministry of Health or the Gaza Health Ministry, whatever they call themselves, come out virtually on a daily basis accusing Israel of attacks where mainly women and children have been killed. Now, of course, if this happens to be truthful, as I said before, it's outrageous and will need to be investigated. But please don't be surprised if in the days ahead we're going to see a continuation of this narrative, much of which is false. So, as I said,
Peter, the reason why that we can't have these numbers fact-checked by independent sources is because Israel won't let any independent fact-checkers in to the Gaza Strip. That is why I just want to reiterate to our viewers why we get these numbers from the Gaza Health Ministry, which we do cite every single time. Peter, we have to move on to our next story, which comes at another related development. In Israel, National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir is once again calling on Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich to join him in opposing the proposed ceasefire and hostage release deal. Ben-Gvir labelled the deal as reckless and urged Smotrich's religious Zionism party to unite with his Otzima Yehudit faction in voting it down. Ben-Gvir emphasised what he called as a historic opportunity for a decisive victory in Gaza, stating that halting the war now would amount to surrender. He also criticised the resumption of humanitarian aid to the Strip, calling it a giant mistake, and claimed that he was the only cabinet member to vote against it. The ultra-nation A-list minister remains adamant that Israel must continue its military campaign until, quote, full victory is achieved, warning that any pause in fighting would only embolden Hamas. We're once again joined by Peter Bourne to discuss these statements in more detail. Peter, we obviously know that both Itamar Ben-Gvir and Smotrich are part of Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition government, which he holds the power due to. Do you see Benjamin Netanyahu, along with obvious pressure from President Donald Trump, accepting the ceasefire under the circumstances that he might lose the support of the far-right parties that form his coalition in government?
Indeed, this is the biggest issue that Netanyahu has faced. It's clear that the Americans have enabled potentially what is the most realistic chance of a ceasefire between the Israeli nation and Hamas. And clearly the right wing of the Netanyahu government are dramatically opposed to this ceasefire. They see nothing other than the total annihilation as Hamas as being anything other that they to fulfill their objectives that they wanted to achieve. On this particular issue, I think Netanyahu will have to stand firm and align himself with Trump, irrespective that may potentially bring down his government, because the Israeli public, Thomas, are so sick and tired of this war, and they recognise that the kind of objectives that the right wing of the Netanyahu government want to achieve are probably unfulfillable. damaged Hamas as much as they possibly can, and at a huge cost to both the Israeli public and to the Gazans and to the Palestinians. And I think if there's any realistic chance of a ceasefire, Netanyahu will have to stand firm against the right wing of his party, not all of whom are aligned with the finance minister, I have to say. So I think on this particular issue, it's a challenge, but I think Netanyahu should and will have to stand firm and go with the Trump plan.
Thank you very much, Peter. You stay with us for further updates on this ongoing situation. The sixth group of patients from the Gaza Strip has arrived in Jordan to receive medical treatment facilitated by the Jordanian armed forces. Among the arrivals were 19 children, accompanied by 40 family members, coordinated by the Jordanian Ministry of Health and the World Health Organization. These patients will be transferred to local hospitals for specialized care. Let's take a listen in to what some of the public said about this situation.
ابني مصاب طلق متفجر عنده نقص عظم حوالي 10 سنتي وربنا أنا جيت على الأردن مش عارف حاجة بصراحة هم قالوا لي الأردن وألمانيا مش عارف وين يودون الأردنيين يا بودون ألمانيا يا بضل عند الأردنيين.
Jordan plans to promptly send patients back to Gaza upon completion of their treatment, making way for the next group. Since February, Jordan has committed to treating 2,000 critically ill Gaza patients and has so far received 246 individuals, including patients and their families. Despite efforts to accelerate the transfer process, logistical challenges and ongoing military operations in the region continue to pose obstacles to ensuring safe and timely treatment for those affected. We're once again joined by Peter Baum to discuss this ongoing situation. Peter, what does this say about the situation in Gaza, both the health care situation, which reportedly has been completely obliterated by IDF forces, and also the situation that so many of these patients are children that have to be now treated abroad, that an international actor has to step in and treat these young people that have been injured in the Gaza Strip?
Yeah, I think what's interesting about this issue, Thomas, is that obviously the relationship and connections and talking between Israel and the Jordanians themselves. Given that, from what we understand, the hospital facilities in Gaza have been virtually destroyed, I suppose it's encouraging that Israel are now liaising closely with Jordan in order to facilitate the transfer of any injured people, be it women, children, or non-combatants.
Peter, do you think Israel is doing enough?
Well, from what I understand, Thomas, Israel is treating Gazans. There are Gazan patients within Israeli hospitals and have been for considerable time. Obviously, it's not given the publicity it deserves, but the fact that now Jordan are willing to accommodate injured people, I think must be a good sign and something that perhaps has been facilitated by the Trump administration too. It's clear that the facilities in Gaza are beyond repair in order to adequately treat the most seriously injured. Hopefully we'll see much more of this from both sides. Something else that has just hit my phone, Thomas, is I understand Hamas are going to respond to the 60-day peace treaty on Friday, tomorrow. We await news of that. Hopefully it will be a positive, and I think if that does happen, obviously we'll see many more injured people being treated as they should be treated in both Jordan, hopefully Egypt too, and within Israel.
Peter Baum, thank you very much as always for joining us We now move over to Europe. to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, where 5 people were injured, including 2 children, in a Russian attack on the southern Ukraine port of Odessa overnight, according to Ukrainian authorities. Regional Governor Olev Kipir has said that a multi-story residential building and other civilian infrastructure were damaged in the attack. 6 apartments were completely destroyed, while another 36 were partially damaged. Moreover, the local emergency service said that 50 people were evacuated from the building. Meanwhile, another Russian missile strike on Poltava in central Ukraine killed 2 people and injured 11 others, as per the local media. The attack has sparked fires and damaged civilian infrastructure, according to Governor Vladimir Kohut. Ukraine's land forces also said that the strikes caused a fire at the Poltava conscription office. Moreover, according to Ukrainian media, at least 3 people were killed and 34 injured today across Ukraine in Russian drone and missile attacks. Ukraine's Air Force reported that Russia used 52 drones launched from several directions, and air defences destroyed 40 of them, including 22 shot down and 18 jammed electronically. On the other hand, Russia has captured a border village in Ukraine's northeast Kharkiv region, as per reports. This comes as Major General Mikhail Gudkov, the deputy head of the Russian Navy, has been killed in Russia's Kursk region. In Russia, UAV debris fell on a private house in the Lipetsk region, killing a woman and injuring 2 others, according to the region's governor, Igor Arnatovmanov. Armatonov also clarified that signals about UAV debris are coming from different areas, and all of them are being immediately checked. We're now joined by our guest, Jonathan Hoffman, who's a former vice president of the Zionist Federation of the United Kingdom. Jonathan, thank you very much for joining us. He joins us live from London. Jonathan, we're seeing escalating in the fighting as peace talks, supposedly diplomatic talks, go on in the background. However, on the battlefield and also in civilian cases, in this case, doesn't stop. Do strikes on these residential buildings show that Russia is shifting tactics? And can I just get your overview on the recent events on the battlefield in the war? Thank you, Jonathan.
Yes, hello, Thomas. Well, Russia is clearly stepping up its attacks. It's a summer attack. The outlook for Ukraine, I think, has got significantly worse. You will have seen that the American administration is pausing some weapons deliveries to Ukraine. They're pausing parts for Patriot missiles, and this apparently comes from their Undersecretary for Defense, Eldridge Colby, who is a long-time critic of US policy towards Ukraine. You know, this is very important for Ukraine, and the fact that the United States is not delivering these parts, I think, is encouraging Russian attacks on Ukraine. On the other hand, and Ukraine only produces about 40% of its own missiles, so Ukraine does rely on allies like the United States for missile deliveries. So that I think is important. On the other hand, I think the other thing to watch is the Russian economy. If it wasn't for the impact of spending on the war, I think the Russian economy would be in recession. If you look at oil and gas revenues in May, they were down 35% year on year. And that's the fault of these sanctions on Russia. As far as the negotiations go, you know, we haven't seen much sign of negotiations in recent weeks. I think Zelensky hopes that he would be treated like Netanyahu in Israel, that United States would give him the support that they've given to Netanyahu in Israel with the raid on Iran. But I think that's really very unlikely.
Yes.
And I think you know, absent pressure on Russia from the United States, strong pressure. I think this horrible situation is unfortunately set to continue after 3 years.
Jonathan Hoffman, thank you very much for your insight and joining us on the programme. We now move over to the Middle East for our next story, where tensions are escalating between Iran and the European Union after Tehran rebuked EU foreign policy chief Kaja Kallas, calling for an end to Iran's nuclear programme. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has warned that the European Union, along with the United Kingdom, could be excluded from future negotiations if they insist on positions that violate Iran's rights under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. His statement came after Kallas urged Tehran to resume talks and cooperate with the IAEA, which Iran has now formally suspended. President Masoud Pezeshkian has enacted a new law halting cooperation under the NPT Safeguards Agreement unless security guarantees for Iran's nuclear sites and scientists are met. Despite the move, IAEA inspectors remain on the ground, and the agency says it is awaiting official clarification. The US State Department called Iran's actions unacceptable and urged Tehran to immediately resume full compliance with its nuclear obligations. We're joined by Joshua Barnes, who's an anchor and correspondent for NewsX World. Thank you very much, Joshua, for joining us. What insight can you give us into Tehran's actions here, and also their interactions with the international community in regards to this situation, Josh?
Yes, well, Thomas, this situation, of course, has been made tense following the action by Israel and the US targeting Iran's nuclear facilities. But generally, across the board, global leaders do see Iran's nuclear and uranium enrichment program as a threat. The level of uranium enrichment, some experts say, far exceeds the amount that would just be for domestic and local use. So there is a fear that if Iran gained a nuclear weapon, it could lead to issues. And let's not forget, Iran have been involved in conflict. There have been proxies backed by Iran that have been directly targeting shipping, targeting Israel, and have been engaged in conflict as well. So that's a bit of the context on this situation. Of course, the tensions between Israel and Iran have blown all that up into the air. But this response from Abbas Araghchi towards the EU is an interesting one, given that olive branch was given out by Kaja Kallas, who of course is a top EU diplomat. Talks between Iran and the US broke down, and Abbas Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister, said that there was no need for talks, that there was no use in talks with the US over a potential nuclear deal after the US military action targeting Fordo and other key bases. The world stage is looking to get Iran back towards diplomatic negotiations, but for them, their position clearly is that they don't want to discuss something when the sort of fate of their nuclear program may have been taken out of their hands. It's interesting what we look at with Iran and what they're doing, following guidelines, pulling themselves out of the IAEA as well. That could have ramifications. That is the nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, and they monitor nuclear progress and nuclear functions in these areas. So it is a step away from what Iran were doing, but Iran's response to that has been, well, we were following the IAEA, and they were saying that what we were doing was absolutely fine. So it's a difficult situation. I expect diplomacy to continue surrounding this issue, whether Iran are at the table or not. But work towards a potential nuclear deal is important moving forward in the years to come.
Thank you very much, Josh. You are staying with us. We move on now and move over to the United States, where in a tense midnight vote, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives has cleared a key procedural hurdle for President Donald Trump's sweeping tax cut and spending package, paving the way for a final vote later today. The vote, 219 to 213, advances what Trump has called his one big beautiful bill, extending Trump-era tax cuts and ramps up spending on defense, border security and energy. But it also includes major cuts to safety net programs like Medicaid and food stamps, including tough new work requirements for beneficiaries. Democrats uniformly voted against the bill. Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries warned that the legislation could lead to hunger, suffering, and even death while benefiting Trump's wealthiest supporters. He said Democrats only need 4 Republicans to vote no to block the bill. GOP leaders faced intense pushback from their own ranks over Senate changes to the bill, including steeper Medicaid cuts and a higher debt limit. President Trump reportedly made last-minute calls to hold out, surging unity and warning MAGA is not happy. Speaker Mike Johnson said the bill isn't perfect, but it is the best possible deal and that getting it to Trump's desk is critical. A final vote is expected now within hours. We're now joined by Stephen Nagy, who's a professor at the International Christian University, located in Budapest, Hungary. Thank you very much, Stephen, for joining us on the programme. Stephen, what are the implications of this quote-unquote big, beautiful bill? And what are the things blocking it, and what implication will it have for the American people?
So there's a lot on the table to answer here, but I think first the implications for American citizens are probably threefold. One, increasing of national debt. It appears that the budget will really not deal with the long-term debt problems of the United States, and this may place the economy and in jeopardy in terms of faith in the American system. Second, it is making cuts and making it much more difficult for people that are at the lower end of the spectrum that do get Medicaid and other forms of social welfare from the federal government in the United States to get access for that. And this is going to make vulnerable people more vulnerable. Lastly, and I think this may be good or may not be good for the United States, is the tax cuts for the rich will allow them to invest in businesses, continue to expand their businesses. This is good if they invest in innovation and hiring and building their businesses that hire Americans, but it could exacerbate the already growing gap between rich and poor. And these are, I think, really critical questions that American lawmakers need to make. With regards to your questions, what is going to happen next? It looks like there's going to be a vote on the floor of the House of Representatives, and it looks like it may pass. My assumption is that President Trump and the MAGA forces will put pressure on the holdouts within the Republican Party to pass this bill. And again, once it passes, then we're going to see some of the downstream positive and negative effects of this very, very large bill.
Stephen Nagy, thank you very much for joining us. You are staying with us to discuss our next story. China has issued a strong warning to the United States and Vietnam following the announcement of a new trade deal by President Donald Trump. Beijing says any agreement that harms the interests of third parties, particularly China, is unacceptable, adding that it supports resolving trade differences through equal dialogue. Listen in to what China's Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ning had to say.
中方一贯主张各方通过平等对话协商解决经贸分歧，同时有关谈判和协议不应针对或损害第三方的利益。
The deal announced just days before Trump's deadline for increasing tariffs on US trade partners is seen as a possible template for future agreements. But Chinese officials accused the US of striking deals that could undermine Beijing's economic interests, with China's Commerce Ministry reiterating its opposition to unilateral tariffs. Trump's trade advisor has previously called Vietnam a Chinese colony, accusing it of relabeling goods made in China to avoid US duties. Markets initially reacted positively to the deal, but stocks in Vietnamese-linked companies fell after details revealed higher than expected tariffs. We're once again joined by Stephen Nagy to discuss this in further detail. Stephen, does China's warning mean we could see fresh trade tensions in the region because of this US-Vietnam trade deal?
Well, ultimately, what Beijing is the message that it's sending is that it's very, very concerned about the implications of bilateral trade deals with the United States on their economy, which is already experiencing some severe downward pressures due to structural issues. That means graying population and young people not really wanting to work, 25% youth unemployment, a huge debt and a housing market that's crashed. So they're concerned about how they'll deal with Vietnam, but potentially other countries could further put downward pressure on the Chinese economy. This is serious, and the Chinese are willing to put pressure on countries that are going to put more downward pressure on the Chinese economy.
Thank you very much, Stephen. We move on to our next story. When on July the 3rd, the Chinese military Southern Theatre Command confirmed that it had carried out a combat readiness patrol around the disputed Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea. This operation, involving both naval and air bases, is part of China's ongoing efforts to assert its dominance over the region. According to the military, the patrols have been conducted since June as part of a broader strategy to strengthen China's control over the surrounding sea and airspace. The Chinese authorities have stated that the patrols are meant to resolutely defend national sovereignty and security in the area, which remains a point of contention with the Philippines. The Scarborough Shoal, located within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, has long been a flashpoint for territorial disputes between the two countries. While the Philippines has maintained its claims based on international law, China continues to assert its sovereignty despite an international court ruling in 2016 that rejected China's territorial claims. Western powers, including the US, have voiced concerns about the growing militarization of the area. The US has reiterated its commitment to supporting the Philippines and ensuring freedom of navigation in the region, calling for peaceful dialogue to resolve the ongoing territorial disputes. As these patrols continue, tensions in the South China Sea are likely to escalate, with the international community closely watching for further developments. We're now joined by Joshua Barnes. Once again. Joshua, what can you tell us about these developments in the South China Sea?
Yes, well, absolutely, Thomas. This is all about territorial claims. China wants to, of course, assert its dominance in the South China Sea and claims a lot of territory as its own. The Philippines among nations which dispute these claims. Now, this drill is interesting. The timing of this drill is interesting as well. China recently sanctioned, just within the last 48 hours, sanctioned a former Philippine senator who had pushed through moves to claims of sovereignty of islands within the South China Sea in these disputed regions. Now these military drills following that, looking at combat readiness. We've seen, of course, China patrol areas across the South China Sea and also carry out similar drills in and around Taiwan, combat readiness drills, which of course in the midst of a separate dispute, but one that is also pertinent to this region. It is unclear what message China is trying to send. Some experts have said that this is more posturing than anything else, but the dispute will still continue to roll on. You mentioned there support for the Philippines in this instance has been backed by the US. The US also backing Taiwan as well in their claims to sovereignty. It's a difficult situation, it's a contentious situation with either sides, the Philippines and China, both claiming sovereignty, but it does have geopolitical ramifications if there were an escalation. Initial thoughts on this one, it's not a signal of war, it is more posturing. Experts backing that as well, but it's one we'll definitely keep an eye on.
Okay, we move and we stay in the Indo-Pacific, where in Indonesia at least 4 people are dead and dozens are still missing after a ferry sank in rough seas on its way to the resort island of Bali. The ferry, carrying 65 passengers and crew, went down just before midnight on Wednesday while travelling from Java to Bali. Officials say 31 survivors have been pulled from the water so far, but the search continues for 30 others who remain unaccounted for. One survivor, speaking from a Bali hospital, said the ferry tilted and immediately sank. He survived but lost his father in the chaos. Let's take a listen in to the son of the survivor.
Selamat, sehat. Selamat. Tapi sudah bisa berkomunikasi dengan orang tuanya? Gak bisa, Pak, masih itu, Pak. Masih direhab.
The National Search and Rescue Agency has deployed dozens of personnel, including Navy and police units, with helicopters and boats combing the seas. Officials blame bad weather, including 8-foot waves and strong currents, for hampering early efforts. Here's what some of the rescue officers had to say.
Dari penemuan korban yang selamat, mereka ada yang memang menggunakan sporty ya, yang awal ketemu itu menggunakan sporty, kondisi selamat, kemudian ada yang terdampar di pantai dan kondisi selamat dan mereka memang menggunakan life jacket.
President Prabowo Subianto, currently in Saudi Arabia, has offered an emergency response. The ferry was also carrying 22 vehicles, including 14 trucks. While most passengers were Indonesian nationals, authorities have not confirmed whether foreigners were on board. Marine accidents are common in Indonesia, often linked to poor safety standards and severe weather. And we will bring you more updates in regards to that developing situation. Well, that is all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you.